Hello, my brothers and sisters, and I thank you for braving the rain today. I'm trying to get there we go. 40. It's a very important number, 40, and I want you to keep that in mind. It's a very significant number, and we will come back to it. We gather today to voice support for the Iranian people's uprisings and for Madam Rajavi's roadmap to freedom and democracy in Iran. The Iranian regime uses economic concessions to benefit the leaders in the IRGC, oppressing the Iranian people, exporting terrorism worldwide, and wreaking havoc in regional countries like Syria and Iraq. Iran is a linchpin. Freedom and democracy in Iran are intricately linked to global peace and security. The regime must be overthrown and replaced with a democratic, secular republic in Iran. Echoing the Iranian protesters who are so brave, and my heart goes to them, we know that they are calling, and we today are calling on the UN Security Council to adopt binding, punitive measures to halt Iran's gross human rights violations and terrorism. No amount of deals, no amount of negotiations can save this regime. Its time is up. The path to peace in Iran and through the Middle East and the world is democratic change. Negotiations in this evil regime have resulted in a devastated Syria, the murders of its own Iranian people, and it has no future in this modern world. The end of the nuclear deal is not an opportunity for a better deal. It should be recognized as the final chapter in the losing strategy of engagement with a regime that is out of time. We welcome change in the U.S. policy towards Iran, and we call on the UN and the international community to stand on the right side of history. The Iranian regime is one of the worst violators of human rights in the entire world. It continues to use torture, execution, and imprisonment as tools for repression and the consolidation of power. Iran's human rights violations have been condemned dozens of times by the UN. We need more than condemnations. We need action. The regime has been largely responsible for the bloodbath that has taken place in Syria and the survival of the dictator Assad. Now, the UN, we know, was formed as an entity to ensure basic human rights and prevent the spread of regional conflict and warfare. The UN Security Council should also investigate the crimes against humanity continued by this regime, most notably the massacre of thousands of political prisoners. The Iranian people are ready to break down that wall that is the Islamic Republic and join the modern world and free world. The regime is outdated, it is corrupt, it is unsustainable. It has no place in the world anymore. The future of Iran is a democratic, secular republic, and the organized Iranian opposition led by MaryamRajavi and the National Council of Resistance of Iran have outlined a 10-point plan that most of you are very familiar with for change in Iran. It includes a new, modern constitution, the separation of church and state, and a free and democratic political process. That vision is embraced by the Iranian people and their desire for economic and political freedom. So we protest today that Rouhani is even allowed to speak at the United Nations. He is a man who has continued to spearhead so much persecution, torture, and death for years. He represents a country with perhaps the most egregious and greatest human rights abuser and main orchestrator, including, and we need to pay attention to this, the funding and the training for Islamic terrorist groups around the world. Well, I want to tell you, Mr. Rouhani, you and the regime's number is up. Your number is up. And that brings us back to the number 40. Noah was said to have built the ark and then be in it in the great flood for 40 days. Moses led the Israelites in the desert for 40 years, seeking out the promised land. And he spent 40 days on Mount Sinai, where he received the 10 Commandments. Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, tempted but not succumbing to the devil shortly before his trial and execution. And the prophet Muhammad was revealed his prophethood at age 40. Muhammad prayed and fasted in a cave for 40 days and began his spread of Islam with 40 followers. Clearly, the number 40 is a significant number. And most of you know that the revolution against the Shah of Iran took place in January of 1978, 40 years ago. The task of the MEK, the People's Mujahideen al-Khalq, it was founded September 15th, 1965 by Massoud Rajavi, and it's changed now with the task of overthrowing and undealing the unfolding nightmare of this regime. That means that some of you have been fighting for 40 years and more to see this change come about, to bring about democracy, freedom, equality, separation of church and state, a non-nuclear state. 40 years. 40 years of sacrifice and concentration and work. 40 years for freedom in Iran. Well, I got to tell you something. Our number is up too. And it's up in the best possible way. Wouldn't it be something to bring about a new life in Iran after working so hard for 40 years? We are so close. In fact, I've been praying and I communicate with God. It's a knowing, it's a conversation, and I know that the end of this regime is coming this year or within the first 6 months of 2019. I have heard personally from a number of Middle East leaders after the grand celebration in Paris year after year, when Madame Rajavi and the National Council of Resistance of Iran brings its provisional government to Iran, it's not going to just restore Iran to its great culture and its former glory and status. It's going to transform all of the Middle East. And that, my brothers and sisters, will bring about a reformation of the entire world. We will all be safer. You are at the very head of bringing about change in Iran and change in the Middle East, but change in the entire world. 40 years. The active resistance and revolution by our brave brothers and sisters in Iran, along with the steadily crumbling of this evil regime, will bring all of your hard work to fruition. Christians and Muslims alike say, in God's time, inshallah, if God wills or God willing. The time is now. The time is now. I pray and trust that it will be so. God willing, bless every one of you and be with us as we continue our work. Thank you.